My talk today is dedicated to NS5A inhibitors, and if you remember the lecture of Professor Jean-Michel Pavlotsky, he told that this is a non-structural protein, which is from the complex of proliferation of the virus on the membrane. On the membrane inside the hepatocytes, and you can see this complex includes three proteins like HCV polymerase, RNA polymerase. This is NS5B, it's called NS5B, NS5A, and some host factors. It's like a cyclophilin proteins. This is an interesting paper that was presented at EASL meeting in 2012, in which you can see the immunohistochemistry of liver with antibodies against the protein NS5A. And you can see how many these proteins inside hepatocytes. These groups, they made a 3D reconstruction of the hepatocytes of infected liver of the human. It's a liver from transplanted patients, but unfortunately reinfected with HCV. And you can see in the inner membrane by green color how many these NS5A parts inside the infected hepatocytes. Therefore, it's very important to develop the drug that can inhibit this kind of protein, because it will also stop the proliferation. It will also stop the synthesis of HCV RNA inside the hepatocytes. If we look at the characteristics of this class of the drug and compare it to another one, like with protease inhibitor that already, two of them they already approved, polymerase inhibitors, the NS5A inhibitors have the very high potency, and they're active through multiple genotypes of HCV. Unfortunately, the barrier of the resistance is quite low, and it depends on genotype. And the barrier for resistance in 1B genotype is high, but in 1A genotype is much lower. Fortunately, this kind of drug have low profile of drug-drug interactions, so it could be used in combinations, and possibly, maybe it could be used in HIV co-infected patients. It's also have the variable toxicity, but generally speaking, the toxicity is low in this class of drug. What is also important that these drugs could be taken only once a day. It's a very good profile for dosing, and they have the multiple antiviral targets like an NS5A and also the polymerase. They also influence the activity of polymerase of HCV. Interestingly, that several mutations already established that responsible for resistance to NS5A inhibitors. And here you can see that much more mutations are associated with genotype 1A and with genotype 1B. And this is explained why these classes of drug, from the first generation of these drugs, they are more effective in 1B patients than in 1A patients. How many drugs are in development inside these classes? You can see the several of them, and I put it on the speed of these drugs come to the market. And the most developed one now is the declatazvir, developed by BMS. It's on the phase 3 studies and possibly will be approved maybe in 2015, 2016. The second one is ledipasvir, and then many companies like AbbVie, Idenix, they developed the first generation of NS5A inhibitors. Moreover, the second generation is also coming, but is only on the early phase of development. It's drugs from Aculon and the Gilead. This second generation will be distinguished by the much more potency, the equal activity in genotype 1A, 1B, and possibly they were active against the resistant strains to other classes of antiviral drugs. Why it's important to talk about NS5A today? Because you know that we have two drugs approved from the protease inhibitor, The second will be maybe protease inhibitor semiprevir will be approved, then polymerase inhibitor sofosbuvir, and possibly the next one will be daclatosvir. And because we should know, we should be prepared to this drug and the combination of this drug, how to use it in our patients. The first study that I would like to show you, it's a common one study in which daclatosvir was used in the combination of pegylated interferon and ribavirin in naive patients. You can see here that it will be the different dosage, 20 milligrams or 40 milligrams of daclatosvir during the weeks 1 to 12. And then if there was a response, the HCV RNA was not possible to determine. The patients treated from the week 13 to week 24 with placebo and pegylated interferon and ribavirin. And also the control arm that it used only double therapy with placebo instead of daclatosvir. And if you can see here, this is a very, very high activity of this two dosage, even the 20 milligrams and 60 milligrams in genotype 1b patient comparing with control arm, comparing with the double therapy. A little bit lower activity in genotype 1a, and it's also active against genotype 4. And after that study, the dose of daclatosvir 60 milligrams was selected for the phase 3 studies. Daclatosvir also was studied with the new types of interferon. The lambda interferon is developed also by BMS. And this is a study that's called DLIGHT that also used daclatosvir, ribavirin, and lambda interferon in G1 naive patients. Also the treatment was 12-week, and if there was the virological response at week 12, the patients treated only 24 weeks. If there is no response, the treatment continued with lambda interferon and ribavirin until week 48. And what we have then in the result, because unfortunately that it was not final result, it's an interim analysis, and we know only the SVR at the 12 weeks. But according to this data, the daclatosvir, this is a green bar, 76% of sustained virological response was achieved in combination with with ribavirin and lambda interferon. This is interesting that much less relapse was found with daclatosvir than with asunaprevir, the protease inhibitors of second generation. The common 2 study, they included patients already experienced, unsuccessfully treated with pegylated interferon and ribavirin, and the design was very similar to the common 1 study. And you can see that they have the prior non-response and partial response patients, and also they used 20 milligrams and 60 milligrams dose of daclatosvir, and in the control arm there was used 24 weeks of pegylated interferon and ribavirin. Why they use it in these type of patients? Because they also active in vitro against genotype 1 study. Also, you can see that this in prior null responders or partial respondents, the combination with daclatosvir was more effective than double therapy, but this data is not really impressive, because you know that 30% SVR is also can be achieved even with protease inhibitors that we have now, the nitelaprevir and the boceprevir combined with pegylated interferons. So there is no, it seems now that it's no still advantages in this combination compared in efficacy with the protease inhibitors that we have now. They also interesting study the common 2 and 3. They tried to use daclatosvir with pegylated interferon and ribavirin in genotype 2 and 3 patients, because in vitro it demonstrated activity against also these 2 genotypes. They tried to treat it 12-week, and then depending on virological response, they stopped treatment and follow up the patients, or treated them additional 12 weeks with pegylated interferon and ribavirin. And also the control arm was the standard treatment for such kind of patients, 24 weeks of pegylated interferon and ribavirin. I will show you the results only for genotype 3, because you can see that's a very, very small advantage of these drugs against pegylated interferon and ribavirin, only 10% increase in SVR. But what most interesting, the efficacy is the same, but the length of the treatment is twice as lower. So instead of 24 weeks with 2 drugs, you can treat with the same efficacy the patients with 3 drugs during only 12 weeks. It's also very interesting non-interferon combination to see the efficacy of this combination in previous null responders. This is the patients who did not respond to combination with protease inhibitors, who are failed to be treated with boceprevir or telaprevir combination. They use 2 drugs, daclatasvir and asunaprevir, in a different dosage and 1 time a day or 2 times a day. They also use 4-drug combination, daclatasvir, asunaprevir, and pegylated interferon and ribavirin, and even the 3 drugs combination, also without interferon, but added to daclatasvir and asunaprevir, they added riba. They included non-cirrhotic patients with genotype 1 and previous null response to pegylated interferon and ribavirin. And what we can see here, the combination of 4-drug, they had practically 100% efficacy. With the double drug combination, interferon-free and without riba, the response rate was lower, but also very high, it's practically 80%. What is interesting? That combination from 3 drugs, daclatasvir, asunaprevir, and ribavirin, they not showed because it's a lot of virological breakthrough during the treatment. 10 patients with genotype 1A, but no breakthrough in genotype 1B. So I think that the results, it clearly reflects the different activity in these 2 genotypes of daclatasvir. There's also a very interesting combination. This was a study with daclatasvir and sofosbuvir, polymerase inhibitors, in G1 patients who failed also telaprevir or boceprevir combination treatment. This is a small groups of patients, 21 and 20, but they used daclatasvir 60 milligrams once a day and sofosbuvir 40 milligrams, 400 milligrams once a day during 24 weeks. And another arm, they used also the ribavirin added to this combination. This is quite interesting because daclatasvir have very, very good potency, but low resistance barrier, and sofosbuvir have the high barrier and high potency. So this is a combination practically ideal maybe for the nowadays. And what we can see, SVR for 12 weeks is practically 100%. Actually, this is one patient missing in post-treatment, but then HCV RNA was undetectable at week 4 and week 24. This is a preliminary data. So the ribavirin is not important for this combination because even 2 drugs have practically 100% efficacy in these types of patients. Unfortunately, this activity will not continue because 2 companies, they could not agree with each other, but the reason will be clear in from my next slides. Because the Gilead, the company that produces sofosbuvir, they have their own NS5A inhibitor that the name is ledipasvir. This is also very potent drug, and what is most important for that it is active against the resistant mutants from protease inhibitors and polymerase inhibitors. So it's very, very potent for the resistant strains too. It's also safe and well tolerated. It's used once daily and have the very limited drug interaction like daclatasvir also. So this is a also potent drug for future all oral drugs combinations. Just months ago, on May 2, the Gillette made a report. They did an interim analysis in which they showed the preliminary results, and you can see that sofosbuvir combined with ledipasvir during 12 weeks in naive patients with genotype 1 have 100% efficacy. The same in experienced G1 patients also, practically 100% efficacy. And they planned a phase 3 study that will be called ION-1, which will include treatment-naive patients, 800 from all over the world, and ION-2, the treatment-experienced patient, 400 from also all over the world. And the treatment will be 12 weeks and 24 weeks. But this is most interesting from that combination. You can see the new abbreviation, FDC. This is mean fixed dose combination. It means that it will be 2 drugs inside 1 tablet for all patients, naive and experienced. And I think that we need to wait 1 hour and a half, maybe 2 years, for finishing this study and to see these results. And I think that the results will be really, really exciting. And in conclusions, ladies and gentlemen, NS5A inhibitors, they are promising DAA for treatment of Hep C with high potency and good safety. The first generation of NS5A inhibitors, like daclatasvir, are in the phase 3 trials and will be approved in 2014, maybe in Europe, and 2015 or maybe 2016 in Russia. And the combination of NS5A with 1 or 2 other DAA plus ribavirin or without ribavirin are investigated, and possibly this combination will be the first DAA combined in 1 tablet with fixed dose for all types of the patients that we have in our practice. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.